Hey friends, so I had written this sermon a while ago, and I'd wanted to wait until I could get into the studio and film it and really put a service together for it. But I feel like it really needs to come out during Pride Month and right now. I feel like it's really important to talk about this. Um, and so I wanted to go ahead and get this service out there. And I think it is it is for the best, actually, that this sermon is not presented in the studio, that it is presented while I'm like gross and unshowered. I haven't yet taken a shower today, and just on my porch, without a whole lot of bells and whistles. I was 22 years old when I first watched Pink Flamingos. My girlfriend at the time was a huge John Waters fan, and I was monumentally excited to engage with this part of queer culture. I went in blind, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't think I could have prepared myself for what that movie is. It is a parade of the crass, a celebration of filth, and most of all, an exercise in disgust. Disgust is a very powerful emotion, isn't it? One of the few that can incite reactions like vomiting. It can send us into fits of laughter, anxiety, and rage. And Pink Flamingos makes you sit in the discomfort. Violence, blood, bestiality, incest, Nazi armbands, rape, abuse, kidnapping, flashing, all are on display. But something else is as well. Queerness. A trans woman with her penis on full display. A drag queen walking the streets of Baltimore in outlandish makeup, and a bizarre but loving chosen family. And what one has to come to terms with is that the queerness is something that would absolutely also make watchers of Pink Flamingos quake with disgust. In one scene, Raymond Marble flashes his penis to a young woman. Instead of reacting with shock or disgust, in an act of subversion, this woman flashes her penis back. At which point, Raymond reacts with the same kind of shock he was hoping to impose on the woman. Her queerness is the subversion. The laugh comes from her getting a rise out of the man who was trying to disgust her by making him feel disgust back. The question being asked is, who is truly disgusting here? Disgust is one of the strongest emotions humans are capable of feeling, and it is innately connected to our survival instinct. Disgust causes us to feel sick when we smell rotten food, when we see pus, when we watch videos of people hoarding garbage in their homes. Our disgust instinct exists for a reason. It is meant to keep us safe from injury and disease. We feel disgust in order to avoid the unclean. I think we've all heard the phrase, cleanliness is next to godliness. We often conflate moral and physical purity, and ancient people were no different. Much of Leviticus is a list of ancient sanitation codes. Don't touch piss, don't touch cum, don't touch blood, and these laws often kept Jewish people safe. When the Black Plague swept through England, many Jewish communities were not wiped out because of these ancient sanitation practices. We saw during COVID what happens when a society refuses to adopt sanitation laws. But this conflation of morality and physical purity has its downsides. And this is something Jesus saw, because sometimes our disgust instinct is wrong. Sometimes it's bigoted. Sometimes it keeps us from people who are different, or it can hold us to unhealthy standards of perfectionism. Disgust is what creates an underclass. And Jesus understood this. Jesus understood that animal sacrifice, a practice used within the temple at the time to atone for sin, often required people to spend money they didn't have to buy an animal for slaughter. He understood that the poor, sick, and disabled did not always have access to the same sanitation practices. He understood that disgust for those seen as unclean often left them isolated, without help or community. To Jesus, it was not enough to simply leave the sides of the field untouched so that the poor could collect it. If a man had no legs, he could not collect the wheat. If an orphan was too small, they would not know how to bake bread. Jesus believed that in order to care for those in need, you had to touch them. and that meant you sometimes had to get your hands dirty. I was very young when the AIDS epidemic was happening, but I am old enough to remember when Princess Diana died. I remember how beloved she was, and as I got older and started examining my own queerness, I started to realize why. During the AIDS epidemic, when many nurses were too afraid and disgusted to even feed AIDS patients, Princess Diana hugged them. She held their hands. She made speeches encouraging others to show people with AIDS basic human kindness. She was a princess. She could have stayed inside Buckingham Palace, draped herself in pearls, and chosen not to care. But she didn't do that. She touched those that society saw as unclean, people who were queer, people who were addicts. She was not worried that they may stain her dresses or vomit on her shoes. She was not afraid of the ire of the royal family. She bravely, boldly held the hands of people the rest of society had marked with disgust, and she did so with poise, grace, and love. I think we need to examine our relationship to disgust and purity. What do we consider unclean? What do we consider sin? And we need to be honest with ourselves, because we tend to moralize our disgust, and that is what leads to prejudice. Many bigots associate white bodies with cleanliness. They see black and brown bodies as dark, frightening, and dirty, whether consciously or unconsciously. We associate whiteness with purity and are taught to do so from a young age. Even young black children, when shown a black doll and a white doll, when asked which doll is bad, will often point to the black doll. Black and brown children are taught that their skin is inherently bad or unclean. It is the disgust of white people that created this lie. This disgust extends to queer people, to poor people, to fat people. Queer people often have sex in positions that disgust straight people. Trans bodies are often spoken of using words like mutilation by people hoping to trigger a disgust response in their audience. Fat people are seen as sweaty and slovenly, unable to clean themselves properly. 2,000 years later, and we are still moralizing what people eat. In her book, How to Keep a House While Drowning, K.C. Davis discusses how the conflation of cleanliness and moral superiority affects mental health, especially the mental health of women and mothers, who are expected to have a perfectly clean house at all times. You are not a failure because you can't keep up with laundry. Laundry is morally neutral. If you go through life thinking every time you clean the fridge, it has to be perfect, every time you take a shower, it has to be perfect, every time you do a work project, it has to be perfect, you will burn out and hate your life. Remember that anything worth doing is worth doing half-assed. One of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn in life is to not let the perfect get in the way of the good. To not let my disgust response get in the way of kindness. And that disgust response not only leads to us being disgusted in others, but in ourselves. We see ourselves as less than. We see ourselves as unclean. We do not think of ourselves as creation made in God's image. We think of ourselves as wretched, horrifying, disgusting creatures. But Christ did not think so. Christ thought we were beautiful. Even the eunuch, the adulterer, the poor, the sick, the sinner, and the tax collector. Christ thought we were beautiful, and he looked upon us with wonder. In 1987, artist Andre Serrano released his best-known photograph. The photograph, known as Immersion, Piss Christ, featured a small crucifix immersed in Serrano's own urine. The work immediately faced backlash from many Christians, who saw it as blasphemous. But the artist, a devout Catholic, saw this work as a work of great faith. When asked about the piece, he said, "What it symbolizes is the way Christ died. The blood came out of him, but so did the piss and shit. Maybe if Piss Christ upsets you, it's because it gives you some sense of what the crucifixion was actually like." I think sometimes we as Christians feel uncomfortable about the fact that our God walked around in a human body. I think many of us would like to imagine that Jesus somehow kept himself magically clean, that he never stank or had dirty fingernails or accidentally got a little pee on his hands while urinating. But I think it is very important to remember that once or twice a day, Jesus squatted down over a hole in the ground and pooped in it. That he chose to come to earth in a human body, and there is meaning in that choice. And not only did he come to earth in a human body, it seems like every bit of Jesus' life was hand-selected to make us examine our biases. Jesus came to earth not as a king or a warrior, but as a brown, Jewish, homeless man. He was born to a father too poor and a mother too young. He was rebellious and ran away from his parents. He made friends with the people living on the fringes of society, with the poor, the immigrants, the prostitutes, and the traders. He did not follow the conventional sexual and gender roles of men living in his time and place. He was, as far as we can tell, celibate, possibly asexual. He did not care about bloodlines or power. He was gentle. He spoke of peace, love, and kindness. He was not exactly what we would call traditionally masculine. Human beings are kind of gross, aren't we? We sweat, we smell, we have all sorts of secretions. We get sick and we age and we die and we rot. I think many of us as Christians have lost our relationship with disgust. We've forgotten that the Eucharist symbolizes blood and human flesh, that we may be baptized in water, but we are cleansed by blood. And as Jesus bled, he pissed, he shat, he died for 3 days, and he rotted. Our faith is rooted in sitting in filth, in sitting with disgust. Because, my friends, it is not possible to live both a pure and a righteous life. You can live a pure life, and I can't stop you from that. That is absolutely a choice you can make. You can sit in a nice, clean, beautiful bubble far away from the suffering of others. You can choose to never look at anything that makes you feel sick or sad or bad. You can choose to be around people who never disagree with you or make you see any new perspectives at all. And you can choose to only have sex in the missionary position purely for the act of procreation, while you and your partner never discuss anything that makes the other feel upset. That is a life you can lead. And I am not here to judge that choice. But it's not going to change much. It's not going to make the world any better. Because righteousness is, by its very nature, filthy. It involves coming into contact with the unclean. It means holding the hands of the sick and the dying. It means wiping the faces of dirty children. It means interacting with people that you find morally inferior and showing them compassion. Christianity is disgusting because we are a people meant to have a handle on our disgust, to look upon others without judgment. Shaking the hand of a homeless man means you are going to get your hands dirty. Washing the feet of a day laborer means you are going to get your hands dirty. We have been cleansed in the blood of the Lamb of God, so blood should no longer frighten us. Christ did not heal the blind man with hand sanitizer. He did so with spit and mud. Christians have become so concerned with being clean that we have forgotten to be kind. And those of us on the left, Christian or not, are no better. We have become obsessed with moral purity, in never making mistakes. We have become so snooty and out of touch and trapped in our own bubble that we can no longer stand in solidarity with the people and communities we claim to. We want to cherry pick the people from marginalized groups that we think are the good ones, and will tear down anyone we deem even remotely phobic or problematic. But we are all those things. We are all messy. We are all problematic. No one is free of that. And judgment doesn't actually make anyone better. It just makes them ashamed. And we, of all people, should know this by now. We get angry and scared and disgusted, and it leads us to all sorts of weird and conspiratorial places. And I know that some people in here are already thinking, but what about the really bad people? What are we supposed to do? Just give them a pass? Do we just let the rapists and the Nazis and the dyed-in-the-wool bigots run amok? And my question to you is, why are those the only people you are concerned about? Why are you so willing to throw away all grace and kindness and compassion for others because terrible people exist? Because most people are not murderers and pedophiles and KKK members. And by giving those people the focus instead of turning our focus to the people, all we're doing is giving them power. We have created our own hierarchies similar to that of the evangelicals instead of dismantling them. These high standards are not placed upon the powerful. The former president of the United States is a rapist with 91 felonies, and he may still win the next election. Meanwhile, our focus is on canceling a trans woman for making a tweet that probably should have stayed in the group chat, or making angry comments to a comedian who was unable to bring peace to the Middle East. We focus on the sinners and adulterers in our midst, because it's a hell of a lot easier than dealing with Rome. The unclean are easy targets. The true filth is harder to weed out. We have cockroaches making nests in our walls, and the trash is piling up, but we are still yelling at other people for not having the laundry done when we come over. So the next time you feel that disgust bubbling up, ask yourself if what you are doing is actually going to make things better. Does the punishment fit the crime? Are there better things you could be doing? And most of all, are you willing to hold the hands of the filthy in order to make the world a little less sick? Amen.